thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to take you through top to tail inspection of our beehives, starting with the honey super and working our way down to the brood box. We're going to see if honey needs to be taken, and we're going to see if the brood is all nice and healthy. Now, everybody beekeeps a little bit different. We're only showing you our way of beekeeping, and it works really well for us in the Brisbane climate. If you were in a colder climate, you may do things a little bit differently, or if you're overseas, most definitely will do things differently. So let's get into it, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Now, I've got a dodgy smoker today. My wife's out checking other bees. She's got all the good gear. That's okay. This one's been dropped a few more times than it should have. Smokes a bit more than it should do, but it's fine. So first off, we're just going to give the bees a little bit of smoke. We always like to smoke at the entrance to the hive. We try never to smoke in the honey super because we don't want our honey tasting like dirty old smoke. So a lot of people think that smoke calms the bees down. It kind of does. What it does, it makes the bees think that there's a fire. They'll go inside their hive, they'll eat up as much honey as they can, ready to abscond if they have to and make a new hive somewhere else. So that's the purpose of smoke, to make the bees think there's a fire, so they're more interested in eating honey and filling their tummies than stinging us when we get in the hive. So anyone that doesn't know, the bottom box is called the brood box. That's where the queen lays all her babies. And then we've got the queen excluder, which can be metal or it can be plastic. It's got little holes in it where bees can go up, but the holes aren't big enough for the queen to get up through. Then we've got honey supers. This is an ideal honey super. It's half the size of a regular, and this is a full depth honey super. So you'll be able to see that. We've got lid comb. Now, a lot of people take this out, or they put mats on their hives to stop bees putting honey in the lid. I think that's counterintuitive. In the winter, we want bees to have extra stores, and we don't want them to work as hard to keep their hive warm. So, build up of honey in the lid going into autumn and winter is fine. Take it out in the spring when it gets warm again. But this is going to keep your bees happy over winter. So you'll be able to see that it's fully capped, which means the bees have finished filling the cells. They've condensed the honey down to less than 18% moisture content, and then they've capped it over. So now it's ready for whenever they need it in the future. But today it's going to be for us. Give the bees a shake. The last few, just lightly brush them off. Again, this sheet is fully capped, ready for harvesting. It's a nice sheet of virgin comb. Now, as you can see, I always work at the back of the hive. I would never work at the front of the hive. Why? Because that's where all the bees are coming and going. And if I block that entryway, within a minute, there'll be thousands of bees around me trying to get into the hive, getting nasty, trying to sting me, just to make their way through. So we work at the back of the hive. There's less bees over here. So that's 4 sheets of honey we've taken out of the top super. All of them are ready to go, but we won't take them all. We don't want the bees to stress, so we don't want to take too much honey. That's okay, we'll just get into them more often. So now we are going to go down into the second super, which is an ideal. So it's half the depth of a full frame. As you can see, their box was so full of honey that they've actually glued the top super to the middle super and filled it with honey. So when I've removed the top super, there's heaps of honey on top of these frames. Pain to clean up, but it's okay. So just to show you the difference, this is all capped honey. This here is empty cells and wet honey. So if you can see it glistening, but that doesn't have this waxy capping on it, means the bees are still condensing it down. Alright, now we are going to remove the top, the second super, the ideal super. And as many times as you get stung, it still hurts. Okay, now, where before I would only put the smoke at the entry, now we're down to the brood box. I like to smoke on top. So now we remove the queen excluder. Now remember, the queen excluder's purpose is to keep the queen in the brood box, not allow her to pass through these little grates up into the honey super, because we don't want her up there laying eggs. It's just for honey. So we're going to inspect the frames now. What we're looking for primarily is the queen, to know she's there, but if we can't find her, that's okay. If we can see that there's eggs, brood and larvae, then we know it's going okay. Especially eggs. Eggs means the queen's laid in the last 3 days. So if you can see eggs, you know that she's there at least in the last 3 days. If you can't find any eggs, you know she has been gone for more than 3 days. So what we have is capped brood. See, it's got a nice yellow capping to it. They all look plump, they all look healthy. If we have a look down here, we can see that there's pollen and there's grubs. When I say grubs, I mean larvae pupa. Just shake it off. So this frame's got eggs on it, which means the queen is in the hive, and at least in the last 3 days. We'll still try and find her. Now bees will always put honey around the top of their brood frame, especially into autumn and into winter most definitely. Honey's a good insulator of heat, keeps the heat in. But if you see shiny spots where brood's supposed to be and it's wet nectar, that means they've run out of room in the super, and we know they had. So they've already started filling up brood space with honey because they have nowhere else to put it. But now that we've given them room, they'll actually take that honey out and they'll move it back upstairs, so it'll be okay. But the problem we have is if there's too much honey where babies are supposed to be being laid, the queen can't lay, she can't do her job. So you're going to end up getting a weaker hive in the long run. We have the queen. Where'd she go? So you can see that all the little girls, they hang around the queen and they feed her and they tend to her while the queen goes and checks cells. If she's happy it's nice and clean, she'll lay an egg in it. So that's great. We know the queen is there, we know the queen's happy, she's laying, she looks healthy, she's walking around fine. So that's great. We're just going to quickly check the last of these frames to make sure that they're not going to swarm, or there's no disease in the hive, but everything's looking good so far. So what I'm also looking for is at least 2 sheets of brood that are fully capped with no eggs, and this is a prime candidate. So I'm going to put this aside and I'm going to show you in just a moment what I'm going to use it for. Okay, so we've checked through the brood box, we found the queen, she's happy. There's eggs, there's larvae, there's capped brood, and there's also pollen. So that's all that needs to be in there. It's all good. We're going to put it back together now. Because I removed 3 frames of brood, I'm going to put back in 3 frames which are brand new and have a brand new sheet of foundation. So you talk to 10 beekeepers and you'll get 1,000 answers. What we do when we're adding new sheets of foundation into the hive is we checkerboard. Some people will say don't checkerboard. Some people say checkerboard. Whatever works best for you. We find this works best for us. Now another handy hint is bees do not like human breath. So if you have a bee somewhere, ow, and it just stung me. If you have a bee somewhere and you want it to move, you don't need to smoke it, just blow with your mouth. So now it's just a matter of reassembling the hive. So first off, queen excluder goes on. Next is the ideal super. Try not to squish the bees. Now we're going to replace the frames we took out of here. So again, I like the checkerboard. And I mean checkerboard the best I can. These last two I'm going to put together. I don't like putting clean foundation on the end if I can help it. So there's already a sheet of honey here, I'm going to leave it. Why? Because if there's a gap and they draw this out, sometimes they're a pain in the ass and they glue it to the actual box itself. So when you go to harvest the honey, you're going to be left with a god-awful mess. So I'm not going to disturb that end frame, I'm just going to put these two in. And again, we take our time so we don't crush bees. Now before we can put the super on, I've got to deal with this little bit of honey that was on top of those frames, because if I just chuck now the super on top, the bees in this honey on top of these frames are going to get crushed, and we don't want that. So it's just a matter of blowing and scraping the honey. Now don't throw the honey on the ground, just put it in a little container, which I'm going to go get. So we never want to throw honey or honeycomb on the ground if we can help it. Hive beetle will be attracted to it, and we don't want hive beetle in our hive if we can help it. So I'm just going to blow the bees off, scrape the honeycomb, and put it in my shaker. Muscle Nation, if you're watching, good plug. Now don't worry too much. If a bee gets covered in honey and it looks like it's stuck. Her sisters will very quickly lick all the honey off her and clean her up. When I talked about putting a fresh frame in on the end, you have the chance of them gluing it to the side. That's what they've done with this end frame here. So to take that out is going to be a messy pain in the ass. So to take this frame out, which we will have to do at one point, it's going to be a messy pain in the ass. It'll stay there now till the spring, and this hive, when we make a split in the spring, there'll be less bees. That's when we can work on this piece of honey right here. It's not doing any harm. We'll let it stay there till the spring, and that's a future problem. So before we took out some brood from the brood box, it's capped brood. We don't want to put eggs up in here. But what we do is we rotate the frames through. Biosecurity Queensland says it's best practice to reduce disease by swapping through your brood comb every 4 years. While that's great, we found rotating more often leads to cleaner hive and better tasting honey. So every time we take honey, we'll take two sheets of capped brood, and we'll put it up in the top super. Now make sure there's no drone comb on it. If there's drone brood, they won't be able to get through the queen excluder. but regular brood is fine. These bees will look after them. And it also means that while these are hatching, the fresh frames we put down in the brood box, they can draw them out and start laying in them straight away. So it's actually going to increase the bees in your hive. You're going to have a stronger hive, you're going to have a cleaner hive, and you're going to get more honey in the long run. Sometimes it's just really hard not to crush bees, but we try and limit it as best as possible. So I put the lid on an angle and then I'm just gently sliding it across, so most of the bees will fall off and not get squished. Okay, so you may have noticed that I took 3 frames of brood out of the brood box, but only took 2 up into the super. Well, good question. That's because the other day I caught a little swarm. It was tiny. They are in a nuke box, but their numbers aren't great enough for them to be able to draw out enough honeycomb to be able to lay in and make more babies in a fast enough manner before winter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my little nuke, put it in, so within a week all this cat brood is going to hatch and it's going to increase the numbers of that beehive. So I hope you learned something today. You can see we started off at the brood box. That's where all the babies are laid. The queen lays the eggs, it turns into little grubs which then are capped off and the larvae pupates. And then will hatch out to be a little bee. Also in the box, the brood box, is pollen. Pollen's really important. It's called bee bread. They feed it to their babies, and without pollen we wouldn't have a strong hive. So that's where they store the pollen as well. Then we have the queen excluder. The purpose of the queen excluder is to stop the queen moving up into the honey super because we don't want her to lay eggs up there. Then we've got the honey supers. You can see in my hive we ran a ideal, which was a half size, and a full depth. Why do we run ideals? Well, they're lighter. So ideally we'd have all ideals, but because we like to rotate our frames from the brood box up into the honey super, it necessitates that we need to have a full depth honey super as well. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to do that rotation. So remember, rotating takes all the old wax and the gunk that's left behind from the babies, puts it up to the top. Once that's capped with honey, you take it out. Now, if it's a really old frame, maybe not do that. Maybe take it up to the top, let the babies hatch out, then discard it, because you probably don't want honey into that. But because we rotate so often, our frames are nice and clean, and we are able to then just keep rotating through. You might have also seen in our inspection that our queen was black. Why a black queen, you ask? Well, European honeybees, there's 4 sub-variants of European honeybees. Most people are used to the Italian bee, which is the nice yellow or golden orange bee. We do run those as well, but one we looked at today was a Caucasian bee. Now Caucasians are black. They have a slightly longer tongue, but they're not as productive as the Italian bees. So that's why most commercial beekeepers will run Italians. And we run Italians too. Italians are nice. But we find that the Caucasians in an urban setting are slightly more docile, and it means they're easier to work. Although that hive today was pissed off. But that's because they were running out of room. So you've got to get to know your hive. If your hive is normally happy, and then the next time you get into it, they're angry, you've got to understand that there's something's going wrong. So that hive's usually nice to work. Today, I got about 30 stings. Why? Because they had no more room to put any honey in, so they were getting stressed out. If I'd left them any longer, they would have started to swarm, which means they would have naturally wanted to divide their hive. They would have made a queen cell. When she hatched out, the original queen that's in the hive would have taken about 70% and flown away. We don't want that to happen. I should have checked the hive a little bit earlier, but such is life. They're okay now. We've taken out honey, we've rotated some brood, they've got room, they will settle down nicely. Thanks again for stopping in. We're the Urban Bee Co. If you have any issues with your hives at home and you live in the greater Brisbane, Logan or Gold Coast area, reach out to us on Facebook. We're the Urban Bee Co. We're happy to give you advice, and we also offer our mentor program for new beekeepers. See you next time.